so wonderful to see you all. Feel the energy of the room. My name is Sylvia Symonds, and I serve as Senior Program Officer on the Pathways team at the Melinda Foundation. And it is my honor to work alongside you on the Accelerate Ed initiative. I'm really excited to be here with you today with our fantastic panel for our session, which is titled Dual Enrollment as a Lever for Change, Pushing on the Dimensions of Policy, Research, and Practice. Our panelists represent a mix of a focus on policy, practice, and research, which, as probably everyone in this room knows, are really all very significant elements of our work once we leave here and go back home and continue to push forward. Each of those anchors matter, and we really cannot continue to be successful in the work that you all are doing without each of those elements. Really looking forward to the insights from our conversation from our panelists, who I have it on good authority are also excellent dancers. So when the dance breaks occur, you should really be honing in on the moves like Jagger that will be emanating from this group. So with that, I invite each of my panelists to please introduce themselves and say a few words about their organization and their work as it relates to our theme today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sasha. I'm the president of Equal Opportunity Schools. Really excited to be here. Thanks, Sylvia, for including us. Our organization works across the country to desegregate access to advanced academic pathways by providing schools with a systematic approach to how they use data and insights. We have a alternative, multidimensional student identification tool that is proven to increase access and opportunity, 9 times more likely to identify underserved and underrepresented students ready for advanced academics than GPA and test scores alone, and a measure called the Conditions of Belonging that helps schools and districts understand what conditions they need to create in advanced academics in order to ensure success for students. We work in about 500 high schools across the country, some of you in here that we're lucky enough to work with. And very excited to be here to talk about the role of providing people with tools and behaviors, maybe in anticipation of their mindset shifts, but not to wait around for the mindset shifts. Let's give people tools to change their behaviors today so we can urgently increase access. And really excited to be here and excited to be a part of this, and we'll certainly dance for money.
Good morning. My name is Chris Nellum. I serve as the Executive Director at the Education Trust West. We are the California-based office of that trust, and so our work focuses on all things California. Our mission is to undo what we see as deeply woven, unfortunately deeply woven, racial and economic barriers that are embedded in our education system. This work for us has been part of our mission for about 22 years. We see dual enrollment as one of many strategies to do what we think about as improving, smoothing the relationships between K through 12 and post-secondary education in our states. As I imagine many others, we have to force folks from those two parts of the world often to be in the same room even. So dual enrollment for us is just one of many strategies to do that. We're an advocacy organization, and we try to do that in an evidence-driven way. And the evidence for us is both quantitative and qualitative. We think what families and students say about what they experience and need is just as important as numbers, which I also love. But we try to be, again, evidence-driven advocates. So happy to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Fink. I am a Senior Research Associate and Program Lead at the Community College Research Center. We're based at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. At CCRC, I lead our research around transitions into, through, and out of community colleges. Dual enrollment has been a major focus, as well as just improving the community college transfer to a bachelor's and beyond pathway as well. At CCRC, it has been working alongside community colleges for 25 years, really sort of leading research framing key issues like the need for reforms to developmental education, for strengthening workforce training, And with dual enrollment, I think of myself as really sort of picking up the baton of many years of dual enrollment research that's been led at CCRC, from some of the early 2000s when we were asking the first questions around, does dual enrollment work for students? And I think that sort of body of research has really matured to ask further questions like who's it working for, who's it not working for, what are the different types of dual enrollment courses that are offered, and who's being served by those, and then how do we just improve? What can we learn from effective practices from places that are having better outcomes, particularly for low-income students of color? And that's really what our research now is focused on. This dual enrollment equity pathways framework is something I'll talk about, but it's a way of sort of thinking about general principles of practice that are required to really use dual enrollment as an equitable on-ramp to college degrees and career opportunity.
Thank you. So we have a set of questions that we're hopefully going to get to many of them. We may also take the opportunity from the panelists to ask each other questions as the spirit moves them. But to kick us off, John will hopefully help us with a little bit of level setting on some dual enrollment facts.
Sure, so just to sort of zoom out for a moment here, there are a ton of high school students taking college courses through what we generally, an umbrella term called dual enrollment, but I think someone said it has like 32 different types of terminology across the country, for everything from very intensive early college, high school, or P-Tech models to your sort of one-off dual credit laissez-faire or cafeteria type of courses. But a couple things to just sort of level set here. Look at this growth. I mean, come on. This is huge, right? All right. We are not seeing this sort of trend line in higher ed, especially in community colleges, especially in the last couple of years, but even before the pandemic. And so a couple things to note, it's about 1.5, 1.6 million high school students taking some type of college courses. Most of this is happening at community colleges, about 70% nationally. It varies by state, good amount in the four-year sector as well. This data is only recent through 2021, but we know from the clearinghouse that it's grown double-digit percentages since. Some of our research is really, we kind of organize it around these problems of practice that are captured by these beautiful phrases that we hear, like random acts before, random acts of dual enrollment. The other one is programs of privilege. So as these programs have grown, and we've shown that they largely benefit students who participate in terms of high school outcomes and college enrollment, college degree completion, it really has left a lot of students behind. And so this is just recent data from the 2017 school year, federal civil rights data, comparing just who's underrepresented in dual enrollment. And we see Native American, Black Hispanic, multiracial, Pacific Islander students underrepresented in dual enrollment compared to the secondary school population. And students with disabilities served under IDEA and English learners as well, underrepresented. And we see this in essentially every state, in most communities. There are some that have been able to close these gaps, and this is where we're turning in terms of our learning and research. What can we learn from places that are sort of going against these national trends? But I think the phrases that we hear in terms of driving our research and practice are how do we work against this idea of program of privilege. We have, if it's maybe 2 million high school students taking dual enrollment courses, there's 15 million high school students out there. So it's grown a lot, but there's a lot of students who aren't getting access. Random acts will be sort of alignment to, not just access for whom, but access to what. And then the other one we're hearing in the community college sector, as these students are taking up 30 or 40% or more of enrollments, but there's just like 2 or 3 people working in the office for dual credit or dual enrollment, is we're an office of 1, or we're small but mighty. And so I think this is a change that's been happening, and our org structures in higher ed at least are not very nimble or agile, and so there's a little bit of a growing pain there. But it's a huge opportunity to really broaden the benefits of these programs.
Thanks, John. So now that we have an idea of the growth and access of dual enrollment across the country, for the panel, what are the dimensions of high-quality dual enrollment? What should teams and sites be thinking about with respect to using dual enrollment as a strategy to improve both student outcomes while enabling access and scale?
I'll start. So I think as we think about the conditions that we need to create, I think it's important to not distinguish access and opportunity with success. There is no contradiction between robust access and robust success. The contradiction is whether we are willing to create the conditions that facilitate success for young people. That's an adult problem, not a student problem. And when we create the conditions, I think there's three things that we've seen. One, intentional recruitment and advocacy strategies that ensure that young people succeed. That's different from providing access. Access is a passive verb. We're talking about advocacy and outreach. Secondly, measuring and enabling conditions in the classroom and using access as a tool to talk about what we teach and how we teach. So to not just assume that the environments that we're putting young people in are the right ones, that we can use these strategies to do things differently. And then third, to think about, as I'll talk a little bit more about, what it means to define readiness. The single biggest problem we see is that myopic metrics of readiness are the barrier. When we only use GPA and test scores, we miss 20 to 25% more students who are otherwise ready to succeed in advanced academic pathways. And so enlarging that tool means we get to enlarge our strategies as teachers. We get to enlarge our strategies as counselors. And so those levers that we pull to say access is the way we do things and advocacy is the way, does start to provoke new behaviors and new mindsets about how we teach and what it means to be in environments that matter to young people.
Thank you, Sasha. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I think the only thing I might add, just an example that we've seen across the state work, and I imagine, so my work focuses on California, so I imagine some of these examples are a little bit different, but one of the things that we've heard from families and students that has seemed to be effective to sort of support their movement into dual enrollment is to look for the obvious, to partner with programs like, in our state, Moja, which is an African-American serving program at our community colleges, or Puente, which is a Latino serving program, or things like EOP or AVID. And we have found that is one of the ways, those data on the last slide, that's one of the ways that some of the colleges and districts we're working with are finding success, particularly those, and I'm sure this is in the air for those who are thinking about advancing racial equity. This is helpful for folks who are scared about the Supreme Court ruling. They can work with these programs that are already doing the work and find obvious, pretty low-hanging fruit opportunities to engage students of color, they are the focus of our mission. And so I just wanted to provide that example. We hear it to be quite successful across the state of California.
I love those examples, Chris. Can you give an example of a strategy that one of those programs might utilize to reach students of color?
So I'm most familiar with Moja and serve on their board. They do intentional outreach to the student and the family, which I know is hard to do. So they operate with CBOs, community-based organizations in their community, and do events. They'll do information nights that aren't just about dual enrollment. We may talk about things like financial aid access, A through G, which is the college preparatory sequence in our state. So they do that in churches. They have they do this sometimes on, they call it mini Super Sunday thing. So they go where people are to be intentional about who you want to participate in. So that we have found to be really helpful.
Yeah, I would just emphasize that. I've heard the churches come up with the Boys and Girls Club, and then sending the students out to talk about it, sending the dual enrollment students to talk about their experience and to sort of market that and answer the questions of parents and families. But to pick up on the theme of quality, I think about quality is about sort of maintaining the college standard of college coursework and providing the support for instructions to teach that rigorous college course where if I'm as a student and I succeed in that course, when I succeed in that course, that opens up a whole world of possibilities because wow, I can be successful in college, I've already done it. So then, if we're going to broaden access, we need to really up the supports. to make sure students are, nobody's going to be ready for these courses. These are going to be hard courses. So what are we all doing? And the strategies there around the first 3 weeks of the first course, really directing a lot of the attention there, knowing that there's going to be students that are struggling and having a plan to catch them all. So that's the quality of the courses, but then another part of quality is what is it all leading to? The piece around alignment and the quality there around the courses, preparing students to enter a degree program that's leading to a career that's valuable to them and their communities.
And one other strategy, I'm so excited to talk that I forgot. So one of the points that we provide to schools is that on our survey that students take, they're asked to identify a trusted adult in the building, and so they see a list of all the adults in their building, and they can select up to 3, and then those adults are paired with them in our online platform and become part of their advocacy team. And one of the interesting things, we've had about 2.5 million students take this survey, is that 40% of the adults identified as trusted by underserved and underrepresented students of color and low-income students, 40% of those adults are not instructional staff. And so when we're relying on the usual suspects to convey the message, we're confusing young people, and in fact about 60% of the young people we're surveyed say, I don't think I'm allowed to take these classes. And bless our counselors' hearts, they will tell us every time, I tell everyone they can take these classes, and I believe that. And the minute you walk in the room, those young people are assuming you're not talking to them. And so changing the messenger matters more than we often give it credit when we're talking about decisions that affect the lives of young people. So using these trusted adults has been an incredible resource, and I think there's other ways to find trust if you don't work with us, but to really think about who your messenger is. And if it's true that a number of your Latino young men are identifying the baseball coach as their trusted adult, and they have never been invited to an academic planning session, you are missing a resource that already exists. We call them equity synapses, these things that if you start to flash them, you'll have a more equitable learning environment.
Thank you. I'm loving the specificity of these examples. And really, you all are teeing up our next question, which is how can we ensure that the expansion of dual enrollment programs effectively reaches traditionally underserved students while maintaining high quality, coherence, and affordability?
I would just start by saying that this is a really important question because we see, although we have this expansion, if there's not specific efforts to ensure that that expansion is serving Black, Latino, low income, and other underrepresented groups, English learners, students with disabilities, it will just widen the gaps. And we've shown that in looking at the federal analysis of school districts' growth and the gaps and how they change. So having specific focused strategies around that is really important because otherwise you kind of get this opportunity hoarding that can happen. So I think some of the things that we've seen, is just addressing barriers to access around kind of eligibility, that mindset, but also policy barriers around funding. If it's not free, essentially free, or very, very low cost, but really free for students, it's just going to be hard to really make this available to all students. And then who's going to teach these courses? And do the schools, Title I schools, have access to the instructors to be able to offer these courses? I think there really just are some policy barriers there and practice barriers that are creating the gaps that we see in access. And so we have to go after those barriers, those exclusionary policies and practices.
One of the other things, what we talk a lot about is intentionality. We have districts in our state, and this is not a knock on them, but they've been, in our state, dual enrollment students receive a higher amount of funding, than regularly enrolled students, slightly different around appropriations. We've seen districts with intention target dual enrollment students as a financial management strategy. And so that intentionality, we're hoping, can be extended to think about who is participating. You can, with intention, identify the high schools in your region that have less funding per pupil or that have a higher concentration of foster youth, or students of color, or undocumented students. There are lots of ways to be very intentional about who you want to be in your program or who you want to provide or facilitate this opportunity for it. So we think about dual enrollment not as it is not on its face an equity strategy. It has to be with intention done in an equity-minded way. Our focus is around racial equity. There are lots of other ways that you can think about that, but it can be done, and it should be done. I think if you think about, if you're not driven by equity, which not everyone is, although a lot of folks say they are. If you're not driven by equity, think about attainment. If you want to raise your attainment rates, the data that John and CCRC have tells you that more of these students are attaining in the ways that we all want to. And so I think that the value add for being intentional, there are lots of reasons to be thoughtful. I know data is an issue in some places, and so I also think about data sharing agreements to be intentional about who you're serving. But for us, again, the reminder is that it takes intentionality. I mentioned intentional outreach, and it also takes intentionality to design dual enrollment offerings. In our state, just as an example, we looked at schools and districts that are serving what we consider to be higher concentrations of students of color, so I think 75% or more. Only 37% of those places, so places with high concentrations of students of color, are even offering dual enrollment. So we have work to do in California, and I imagine other places, given the data on the last slide.
I think this is a really important topic to talk about, and I think this movement in this room has a chance now to ensure that we're not back here 20 years from now trying to reverse engineer equity. It's really hard to do, and so I think there's a couple things. I think one is that we often say that opportunity precedes achievement, but we've created a system that achievement dictates your opportunity, and therefore we have an inequitable system. You're not going to get out of that by continuing in that cycle. And privilege, access, those are opportunities. Secondly, that you don't get different outputs without different inputs. I'm not a scientist, but I think that that's pretty true. You just can't change the composition of something without changing the things you put into it. And so the tool that we use, and I think it doesn't have to be our tool, but I think if you don't give people viable, tangible alternatives, they will default to the status quo about everything. About exercise, I will about my own habits, like we will about those things. And the status quo is that we think that certain predictors of success are true. And so we've created a system that reinforces that sense. And so our measure, which we call the Student Insight Card, uses 43 unique insights on every student to build a multidimensional measure of readiness. It's not magic, but it helps every school see, engage, and resource students. If you don't see a student, you're not going to engage them. If you don't engage, you won't resource. But that multidimensional tool, 80% of the young people that we identify with that tool would have been missed had GPA and test scores been the sole measure of their readiness. So to the extent we want to enable more access and opportunity, particularly equitable access and opportunity, we have to start to systematize new kinds of tools and not just leave it to the whims of people who are already overworked, overstressed, and don't have the opportunity to see young people differently. And so I think in addition to making the commitments, I think equity is a plan, not a pitch. And I think we really need to start thinking about, do our schools or our systems have tangible, viable alternatives to say we are going to broaden our measure of readiness? And if they don't, how do we start to really help them think about those ways and give people permission? We talked yesterday about there's mindsets that I don't want to change, and then there's mindsets that I do, but I don't know how. And I think if we give educators credit, this is a mindset they want to change, but they don't know how. So let's give them those tools.
Yeah. So in this room, we have such an amazing mix of folks from K-12, higher ed, national partners, intermediary organizations, employers, youth-serving organizations, and other community-based organizations. Can you all talk about the role that some of these sectors play in developing high-quality pathways?
I guess I got to start with our community college friends out here. Is the community college research center? How many of you are at community colleges? You guys? All right. I'm talking to y'all. I'm really ultimately really hopeful about the opportunity here. This is especially with our community college colleagues really stepping up. This is a cross-sectoral partnership. It requires, collective action. But what we've been studying, we've been looking at sites that are, having more success in dual enrollment in terms of access and outcomes for Black, Latino, and low-income students. And then we see that their community college partners are really doing their own student success work internally, implementing these guided pathways reforms, which is really about what is this leading to, what's the value for students, and then how do we connect that to our high school dual enrollment and do this sort of outreach. We talked about the work around outreach, the alignment to the pathways, the college advising and support for planning your college degree program with a college advisor, and then the real work around instructional quality and supports that I talked about before. So what I would say to our colleagues, our community college colleagues, that stuff requires investment. It requires the college to step up and have the advisors, have the staff, and to work, of course, with our employer and K-12 partners to do it. But there are real incentives for taking this approach to dual enrollment. This is what we're describing here in Accelerated Ed, this deep framework that's about creating a pathway to opportunity and doing that outreach to folks who are not getting access. And the opportunity is that for community colleges nationally, about 1 in 5 of your students are high school students, and that's grown a lot. In some states, it's a third or more. Some colleges, I'm talking 240, 50% of our headcount are high school students. And if we're not focused on broadening college access and equity and connecting to pathways, then that is just going to serve students who are, maybe not going to end up going to college, or they're sort of just on the way to university anyway. But this approach around pathways, I think, is really the incentive there for community colleges, which, by the way, in many places are losing money on these courses. They're not getting as much revenue as it costs to offer them. Really, the opportunity is there is that you can increase college access and attainment, get more students who, instead of not going to any college, are going to come back to your college. They're already successful, passing courses and completing degrees at higher rates, and so you're bringing in that yield. So that's the business case, and it really is aligned to the sort of equity and college access case. And that's why I think it really requires this enlightened self-interest from leaders across sectors, and in particular community colleges, to step up and to lead this work. We're at the Community College Research Center, and that's what I'm talking to here. But I think it requires collective action. But I think it's a really hopeful set of incentives in many communities.
My quick thought here is just a plug for vision-aligned, mission-aligned technical assistance providers. Folks we know are working really hard already. And there are lots of folks who, like our friends from Career Ladders Project who are here, Kylie and Naomi. Not plugging them just because I think they're fantastic humans. They also are experts, have worked on college campuses. And so folks like that in your communities, I think, can be good partners to you as you think about how to do this well. Folks like Career Ladders Project or others in your city have toolkits and resources so you don't have to recreate the wheel. So as I think about cross-sector work, I just think TA providers are really, really helpful. Mission-aligned, values-aligned TA providers.
I think the only quick thing I would add is I think it's okay to admit that we're here because the system isn't working for a large number of young people. And so recreating a new system does take more people than the old system did. And so thinking about the ways in which you're creating catalytic opportunities for people to really interrogate what we're trying to accomplish. We aren't just adding, salsa to the burrito. We're really... I get credit for that. We are actually really trying to build a new system, and I think that requires a real set of opportunities to talk about that with educators who are in charge of the current system, with those who will be in charge of the next system, and to think about the ways in which the teams and the various actors in your space can come together to really both celebrate but also inspire each other. This is going to be hard. And so how do we think about the mistakes, not repeating the mistakes of kind of leaving education to the schools, and what happens in the school is just where I send my kids, but to think about this being a community space that we're creating. And I think community colleges, other organizations can build energy and optimism about what's possible by really bringing people together differently than the kind of benign neglect we can also often have about the system as a whole.
Awesome. So I want to shift us to talk a little bit about advocacy strategies. So from your all's lens, what are effective advocacy strategies at the local and state level to advance policy that creates enabling conditions for scaling access to high-quality dual enrollment?
For me, advocacy strategies. I think one is to do the work. So one, I think, we started down this road as an organization in 2020. I think in the middle of the pandemic is when we adopted dual enrollment as a advocacy strategy. And one lesson is, there were already the folks doing the work across the state, but our goal was to catalyze or accelerate a conversation about dual enrollment statewide. So I think to try to think, to launch an advocacy strategy, a campaign about what, Massachusetts, I think, has, I know they're here somewhere, but we look to them a lot often because they have a thoughtful, clear set of messages about what dual enrollment is and why it is and what the benefits are. So I think just launching a statewide campaign is helpful to help people understand what it is and the benefits. The other thing that I'll mention is advocacy at its best is about coalition and partnership. And so to think about advocates as a partner to you. We often at West we will say things that sometimes our college residents can't say because we can take the heat and they get to continue to do the good work. And so partner with advocates and help them support you to get, secure greater resources to get your K-12 district to work with you if you're a community college. And so I guess the takeaway message is advocacy can be helpful, and I hope that advocates can be seen as partners and not adversaries in the work.
Appreciate that, especially the advice about partnership and those brave souls who can take up and say the things that some of us might be limited in saying. I worked at a state institution and in higher ed for over 20 years, so I totally understand that vibe. So in thinking about overall strategy and recognizing that each of these teams is working to advance dual enrollment in the context of accelerated career pathways, how might they push on the overall regional and or state dual enrollment strategy? Like what are one or two things that folks might be able to dig in with, and in what ways can the shift happen from the sort of random acts that we've been talking about to comprehensive post-secondary pathways that enhance equity and access and better align career readiness and career pathways?
I want to give a shout out to the data geeks in the room and just quote a couple of data things that we have, because I do think data needs to play a role in our advocacy because we are combating a significant amount of mythology about what education is, what it does, and how it works. And so I'll try to make this quick and you just cut me off. But so again, we survey a lot of students in the schools we work in, and the goal is not just about to create a survey, but to provide real-time data reports to schools and districts so that they can start anchoring their decisions in more than just national data or worse mythology. And a couple data points that stand out on an advocacy angle is only 15% of students who are not enrolled in advanced academics say they feel challenged by their current coursework. Teachers and administrators are most likely to rank GPA prerequisites and test scores at the bottom of a predictive scale and rank motivation, mindsets, and perseverance at the top when they ask what best predicts success. So kids aren't challenged. Adults are telling us GPA prerequisites and test scores in my school aren't a good predictor of success. Only 22% of teachers say their standard level courses are challenging and preparing students well for college. So somebody just pull a fire alarm, because that feels like both an urgent situation, but also I think an advocacy. I don't think people know that. I think people have more faith in the system than they do, and they want it to be this way. And I think our data continually shows that that's not true, but people don't know what to do and they think they're following the rules. And we've worked a long time with AP programs and other things as well, and the things that people believe that they are supposed to do to enforce segregated AP programs will drive you insane. And until we give them different ways of thinking about that problem, they won't shift. And so I think data is a significant part of thinking about what advocacy looks like and how advocacy is not just saying more, it's saying different. I would, it makes me think about, too, from the higher ed perspective, just the real crisis of relevance and value in higher ed generally, including community colleges, which were declining in enrollment even before the pandemic. And now there's some leveling out, and it's, some more flocking towards career technical programs, and it's dual enrollment. Basically why it's not even worse than it already is. So I think we have this crisis of relevance, which really, I think, questions, some of our core products at the community college, the general transfer degree, for instance, the sort of get your gen eds out of the way advice. Get them out of the way. How can we talk about college coursework like that? So I think that how you can push in your state with your sort of collective approach that's really thinking about quality and that end goal and the connection to pathway, I think you can inspire your colleagues to show them what quality looks like in terms of alignment and not random acts, not getting the gen eds out of the way, but really purpose and relevance for students. And I think that's, I think we need more of that. We need more examples of what that looks like in Idaho and in Ohio and Florida. We need local examples of what that looks like in my state and what it looks like when you have a collective action, the employer, K-12, post-secondary, et cetera, partnership leading that. So I think we need that inspiration in those states.
Thank you for that. So we're coming up almost at the end of our time, but a shout out to the data geeks, as you said, Sasha. So this question is for all those who have data in their hearts. What research findings should influence the evolution of efforts to scale equitable access, and how can these insights be further leveraged for systemic change? What additional knowledge gaps need addressing from your perspective?
Well, from a researcher, thinking about this, I think about a few things. Kind of coming back to the advocacy question, I think research can help with advocacy by investigating questions and potential barriers, like thinking about the eligibility, the test scores, the placement scores. We just partnered in Ohio, evaluated a statewide policy they did there in 2017 about the innovative programs, where in 2017, partnerships of community colleges and high schools could get permission to not have any eligibility requirements and just basically go on recommendations and other things, provided that they're going to up the outreach and support, particularly on underrepresented students. And when we looked at that phased rollout, the impact of that policy change, we had more Black and Latino students participating in dual enrollment. So I think now in the state, during the pandemic, they shifted away from tests anyway. But I think that's, from a research perspective, we can kind of test hypotheses that we're hearing bubble up. But I think another approach is to both motivate reforms, but also measure reforms. Motivate them by saying, we have this problem, we have programs for privilege, here's what that looks like locally with your own disaggregated data, but then measure what is being implemented and are we seeing changes? And are we seeing changes when we do something next year? Do we see something in next year's numbers or next semester's so that we can see, are our changes to reforms having an impact, and how do we strengthen that impact? And through a continuous improvement. So I think about this idea of measuring and motivating reforms as a key purpose of research.
I think another knowledge gap, I think we know a good deal about, at least for the students who benefit now, what the outcomes are, what they gain, what they earn in terms of units, retention. But I think we know less about how students are experiencing dual enrollment. And so one knowledge gap that I think, or two that we're thinking about are related to students and families. One is what are their perceptions of dual enrollment, both the student and the family. We hear a lot that dual enrollment isn't AP, so I don't want my kid in it because it's not AP. We hear that a lot from Latino parents in our state, for example. And so I think that's one set of knowledge gaps we have, is what are the perceptions of dual enrollment or early college, and I think that can inform then how we overcome it as we think about campaigns and advocacy. The other is just how are they experiencing dual enrollment? How was your time with these courses, and did you have supports around you as you were participating? What was your experience with the person in front of the classroom, the teacher or the faculty member? And so I think two sets of knowledge gaps are perception and experience, and it's hard to do. I think a lot of you in this room have a lot of insight on both of those topics, and so I think researchers should partner with folks like you and students to learn more about those two aspects.
I totally agree, and I think that, I mean, shout out to that trust. I think if you want resources, their website is full of amazing research, and I think picking up on what you're saying, Chris, I think what we found is particularly around this idea of belonging and really helping to shift the conversation about belonging. I think that's a gap. For a long time, we used the measure of belonging that asked young people if they felt like they belonged in their advanced academics, and we found that a lot of educators were mistaking acquiescence for belonging and expecting young people to belong in environments where it is very logical to feel like you do not belong. Belonging is not a normative feeling, no matter what the research will tell you. It is safe to feel like I don't belong. And so what we incubated was what we call this idea of conditions of belonging. Belonging is a lagging indicator. We're all doing it now, looking around, managing the conditions, understanding, and then we decide whether we feel like we belong, and it's malleable. And so the idea is that there are now conditions that we can measure or you can talk about in schools and in community college settings that correlate to the belonging. And I think to really shift the gaps away from belonging being a student responsibility to belonging being an adult responsibility to create conditions that young people respond to. And so I think that's really essential. And then I think secondly is to really understand what it means to widen the aperture of readiness and to think about this next 20 to 25% of young people who may be different in some important respects than the young people that are in your programs now. And to think about what you need to do. Supports are certainly one of them, and other things, but to not assume that what you're doing fits all of the students you want to think about, and to look into the research around our conditions, around relevance, around feeling part of the community in class, around receiving high quality feedback, these things that really do think about that. And then lastly, I would say there's a lot of research around student interest correlating to student achievement. And so just because you think X class is the best first class for a student to take does not mean that's the class they should take. And really doing a good job of understanding what are our students' interests. We did some research with Ed Trust where 40% of the young people were identifying STEM careers as their interest, and only 3% were in an advanced biology class. Doesn't mean everybody has to take biology, but that's an indicator of STEM success. And so how do we think about anchoring our information in student interest and student aspirations? We talk about the aspiration gap a lot. I think there's research that can really help us think differently about that.
One more quick knowledge gap as this timer counts down. I think it's important to think about is we know the benefits to students, or at least we have a good evidence base there, but I do think as budgets tighten up, we have a $38 billion with a B deficit in California in our state right now. I think folks will start to look for targets and budgets, and I think it will be important for us to be able to maybe see serious steps, and I just don't know, but document the ROI for dual enrollment. What is it saving the state? How can we make the economic case for dual enrollment, not from a student perspective, which matters most to me, but I think we also need to talk to state officials about why dual enrollment is helpful to them and their statewide attainment goals or equity goals. And I don't know if we have estimates of the ROI for dual enrollment or not, so that seems like an important gap.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a moment of privilege and hopefully blow up the timer a little bit and just ask one last question, which is, what is one thing giving you energy and or hope about this work and this community?
I got it, top of mind here. One thing in our research when we looked at colleges connecting their guided pathways reforms to high schools and with a focus on access and equity, one thing we observed that was really cool, and it seems like a lot of folks are working on something relevant, is just, taking the millions of students who are like CTE concentrators in high school that have a clear interest in something and embedding the dual enrollment courses into those CTE programs of study, which most dual enrollment is not CTE. But so it's like this opportunity to expand from that 2 million, maybe we can go up to 5 if we can just default embed in dual enrollment into CTE programs of study to get folks to that post-secondary CTE degree, or to broaden horizons to bachelor's or master's. I just feel like that there really is that, you know, colleges are talking about their broad fields of study, like our health sciences area, our business area. Those align to these CTE programs, and you know, we're having a breakout session next with a couple folks coming up to talk about how they did that. But it just seems like a huge opportunity to connect college courses instead of tracking into college or career, putting the college into the career.
I think for me, the people, it's amazing to see committed folks who are doing the hard work every day, adults on K-12 campuses and at our colleges. You know, Naomi and Kylie, we have a strong, I think, vibrant community of folks who are committed to this work in the state, and then also the students. It's amazing. You know, their aspirations, I think, go far beyond, I think, what adults often think of them, and so the people doing this work in California are giving me hope and energy.
Yeah, I think that this room is really at the bleeding edge of what's going to be a movement to completely reimagine high school, and I think that you all are leading the way on thinking about what it actually means to get a high school education or be high school aged and get an education in this country, and it's a long overdue conversation, and I think it will be this room that really sets the tone for that conversation over the next decade.
Well, one thing, I wrote a ton of notes, should have brought a notepad, about this session, but one thing I definitely wrote down was intentionality as a theme. And I just want to thank our panelists for the intentionality of the time they spent with us and what they shared with us and how they showed up. So please join me.